Welcome to our Family Talk video on eating and nutrition at college. I'm your host, Rebecca Downing. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Parent Initiatives at Colgate. Many people are familiar with that old adage of the freshman 15. They might joke about students going to college, getting away from mom's home-cooked meals and her watchful eye, and then getting carried away by passing past the salad bar and going for the hamburgers and the French fries whenever they want. But in reality, some students may actually find themselves not eating enough when they arrive at college for a variety of reasons. In any case, the transition to a dining hall environment can be a real adjustment for students. It can be a challenge. So today, Allison Bowers, Colgate's dietitian specialist, is here to talk with me about important aspects of eating and nutrition that are particular to college students and the resources that Colgate has in place to support them. We will also discuss ways that parents, family members, and chosen caregivers can help their students eat well at college. Allison, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So let's start with a few common concerns that family members might hear from their students in the first days or weeks of school in relation to their experience with meals and dining. And so for each one of these, I'd ask you to kind of talk about what's going on there maybe, and share with us Colgate's resources. And then we can also talk about how Colgate addresses any concerns that come up and also what parents can do. So the first thing they might hear from a student is there's nothing healthy for me to eat at school.
Yes, I hear this one a lot. As a dietitian, it sort of breaks my heart, but I can actually guarantee that there is healthy food in all of our dining areas. I think one of the big things to explore is, what does healthy food mean to that student, right? Are they looking for certain veggies? Are they looking for cold vegetables and crunchy vegetables as opposed to maybe something sauteed or something that has a sauce on it? Are they looking for more of a salad bar type option? Are they looking for something vegan? Or are they looking for something egg-free, dairy-free? So I think helping explore what that healthy option means. And then as we go through this today, of course, I'm going to help sort of guide everyone as to where to find a lot of these options on campus. But like I said, at all of our dining areas on campus, we always have vegetarian options. We've got a huge salad bar in Frank, which is our main dining hall. We've got another huge salad station over at Coop. And also, we've got quite a few vegetarian and really healthy chicken options that are down at Donovan's Pub. So we've got something for everybody everywhere.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Another one that comes up sometimes is, when I got to the dining hall, there was nothing there. Everything was gone.
Yes, I hate when that happens. And so we hear this the most probably late night or times where we just don't have the volume of students coming in that we essentially just don't want to put food out that is now just sitting under heat lamps, right? And it looks unappetizing, the color might change, chicken might dry out, right? So it just isn't the quality that dining services would want to put out. So typically when that happens, it's because the food is being made fresh to order, just like in a restaurant. So that student can go right up to the grill and ask for a sandwich, or they can, ask for some sort of veggie burger, or they could always go to the salad bar. We typically will have the yogurt out. We always have things like cereal. We always have, bread items out and fruit. So there is always something available, but we do just ask students to sort of speak up for themselves and ask, because the staff is there to make the food, but it's typically by request at that point, like I said, instead of just letting it sit out.
Sometimes also I've heard, like in the very busy times, like right around the noon hour, a tray might empty out because there's a lot of students eating. But again, you mentioned like the batch cooking. So the idea from what I've heard is that they just need to wait a couple minutes and another tray will come out of that same menu item.
Yeah, so we have many cooks out back making the food fresh from scratch. And because so much of our food is from scratch, we do it in much smaller batches. And that is for the purpose of changing out those trays pretty frequently, again, so that you don't have food that is sitting under those heat lamps for hours at a time.
Great. So another thing that may come up is students that say, there's just nothing I like. Or there's nothing that fits with, I'm gluten-free or I'm dairy-free. Let's start with that they like, there's no food that I like. What's going on there?
And I think there's some really important probing questions to ask here. I think that this is a really good opportunity for students to maybe explore new foods that maybe they traditionally weren't exposed to at home. The average person only eats about 10 foods in their diet. So just as human beings, we tend to eat a fairly restricted diet that we sort of put on ourselves. And then sometimes when we get thrown into a situation where there's lots of choices, all of a sudden, nothing looks good. And a lot of times that may be for a couple of reasons. It may be that food is unfamiliar, or talking to students, they might say, well, I like chicken, but I only like my mom's chicken. I don't like the chicken here. And so sometimes asking those probing questions of what are you looking for that you like, that you're not seeing, and go from there. We also have spices available. There's definitely one in Frank. And part of that was because, we don't want to make the food overly spicy for people who don't like spice, but we also don't want to make it completely bland. Plus, we know that there are students with all sorts of allergies and diet restrictions that can sometimes limit how much, we may season a food. So we also put out a spice rack for folks. We also have a whole display of sauces. So a lot of times we encourage students to find something that either is unfamiliar or maybe that they liked at home that is familiar, and then really sort of play around with it and make it to their liking. Also, they can meet with me at any time or the dining services director. We do work a lot on what we like to call dining hacks. We realize that you can only make chicken so many ways, right? You can only make an egg so many ways, or there's only so many flavors of yogurt that we can put out. So when a student is eating on campus multiple times a day for a year and then maybe for 4 years, it can get boring, right? Just like when we're at home and we open our fridge, some days you just look and there's nothing that looks good in there, even though the fridge is stocked full of food, right? We've all been there. So we also encourage students to sort of change their perspective a little bit and look at the on-campus dining areas almost like a whole cupboard of ingredients, so that you don't need to just take what is out on the tray, but maybe you go to the salad bar and you get some lettuce and some tomato, and then you go over to we have like a sort of Tex-Mex station in Frank, and you go get a scoop of chili or some beans and rice, and then you get some sour cream and you make a taco salad. Or you grab some bread and you put it through the toaster, and then you drizzle it with some olive oil and some balsamic and some sliced tomatoes, and you have some instant bruschetta. So we always encourage students to start to get a little bit creative with what they can find in the dining hall. And of course, if there's anything specific that they are really not seeing, I always encourage folks to join our dining advisory committee. Shameless plug there, where students can meet with myself, with the dining services director, with also some representatives from the university, and of course other students. And that's really where we welcome that feedback of what people are looking for. What are the food trends right now that students want to see?
That's great. I was thinking about what you were sharing and about them getting creative. And the fact is that for many students, they may be coming to college having never thought about putting food together on their own, right? Like they were always served the food because someone else in the family was preparing it. So it sounds like what you're saying is like there's a moment of empowerment here where they can actually start to be creative on their own and take a little bit of charge with what they're choosing to eat. It might take a little bit more time and planning, but can you talk about what dining services has in place to help students plan? You've also mentioned that there are, besides Frank, we know we have the other dining venues like Chobani at the Heber Cafe, there's Donovan's Pub, there's the Coop. Can you talk about what resources are there for students to be able to plan their meals?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have some of our menus are available online, not all of them. Frank is one that's typically available. Coop is typically available. We also have our Boost mobile ordering app. So some of our locations, students can order things like sandwiches or yogurt bowls, smoothies ahead of time. Like you said, Chobani at Heber Cafe. The Coop is another one where you can do Boost mobile ordering. So students basically have that menu right there that they can customize, especially if time is tight. Then they can just sort of order that and it's more of a grab and go option. Chobani also will run a lot of regular specials. So we always have people check there. It's right in the library. So 99% of the time the students are there anyway. And then I always encourage students to follow Colgate Dining on Instagram, because sometimes they'll have some little pop-ups. They'll bring a food truck onto campus. They'll run a special somewhere. So we always encourage students and parents, if you want to stay involved and sort of stay connected that way, to follow dining services on Instagram.
Oh, fabulous. Thanks. There's one other concern that I wanted to bring up that probably has a few dimensions to it that family members might hear from their student after a week or two, or maybe even later in the semester, which is the food's making me sick. Is that something you hear a lot, and what's going on there? Like, or what should we talk about there?
So believe it or not, Rebecca, the number one reason why students make an appointment with me is for GI distress and GI issues. And that could, like you said, it's multifaceted. There's typically a few different levels there. One of the number one reasons that we typically find is that it's not so much the food, right? But it's the environment, right? And so a lot of times when students are coming to school, they become sort of these giant balls of stress, right? And when we are these giant balls of stress, our body goes into this fight or flight, right? And that our bodies are getting ready to fight against the big physics exam that we have, or the group project where our group members aren't participating equally, or graduate school applications and interviews, right? There's all these different things that might be coming up. Plus you add on any homesickness, or if there's anything going on at home that maybe the student is missing or is trying to be a part of. And it can all sort of play into this fight or flight response. And typically when our body's in that fight or flight response, blood pretty much leaves the GI tract. And that is really difficult if we then go to the dining hall and we put a bunch of stuff into our GI tract. So a lot of times that will result in some bloating, some reflux, even some constipation or diarrhea. And we hate to have our students uncomfortable with that. So a lot of times what I tell my students first off is making sure that they are taking adequate time to eat. I think a lot of students come to me and I hear very often that eating is just not productive enough. Why would I take a half hour to eat a meal when that's a half hour that I could spend meeting with a professor, making flashcards, watching a webinar, and they don't see it as productive. So then what happens is that by the time they do eat, they're often multitasking. So they are, doing their physics homework or making their, flashcards for an exam while they're eating, completely disconnected from sort of that mind-body connection. And then, of course, then they leave the dining hall, haven't really given their body that chance to really sort of rest and digest. And then, of course, the second they step out, they go, oh my God, my stomach hurts so bad. It must be something that I ate. And so that is definitely one piece of it. So making sure that students are really taking that time to sort of just power down, whether it's a conversation with friends, they have a nice mindful podcast they can listen to, or music, or just, I know it's really hard for all of us, but even sort of just sitting in silence with our meal, sometimes even just for 3 minutes can do enough just to sort of bring that blood flow back in. The other piece with that can happen is that sometimes the food can sort of make us sick and not really agree with us. And part of that reason is often because students will come into the dining hall and often they're not eating regularly enough throughout the day. So a lot of students sort of fall into this schedule of they skip breakfast, or maybe breakfast is a coffee or two, and then they go to class, they get stressed. By the time they get to the dining hall, they've slept all night, they've skipped breakfast, they've gone to class, right? So they've gone maybe 14 or 16 hours without eating. And so at that point, their metabolism's off a little bit, right? It's not running at its maximum capacity. And that student is more likely to just choose whatever looks good in the moment. And unfortunately, those don't always agree, right? So I always say college dining is such a funny place if you take those meals out into society, right? So it's only really in college dining where somebody might sit down and have a slice of pizza, an orange, yogurt and granola, followed by a brownie, right? And when we really kind of take that out, that's probably maybe not a meal or a mix of nutrients that we would make for ourselves. But again, we're sort of just putting everything on a plate. So one thing that I can help students with also is finding some of those foods that maybe work a little bit better together. Maybe they're a little lighter on the GI tract. And one thing I can do is really help students eat in times of stress and then maximize their intake sort of in times of relaxation. So sometimes we can pinpoint meals during the day or times during the week where that student does feel more connected. They do feel a little more at home here. And sometimes we can really utilize those times to practice making those really well-balanced meals that leaves everybody feeling comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking, going back to, you mentioned some of the resources like the Boost mobile app and the looking ahead to the meals, another thing some students might say is, I just don't have time to eat. And so I think those are options that when I hear from parents, my student says they don't have time to eat, I can let them know that students can think about planning when they're going to eat and doing things ahead of time. So if they do have class that runs into noon, and then they have a job on campus and they need to work, and then another class, but they have a break at 10:30, they could go and get a grab and go option and put it in their fridge to eat later. So that idea of encouraging them to be planful about their meals so that they aren't going from 8 and 9 in the morning to late in the afternoon before they eat again.
And also even planning the night before, right? If somebody knows that they have an 8:20 class and maybe they don't have a great break, and then they have to go to office hours and they have practice, right? And they have all these things going on, then maybe they do order a smoothie from Chobani the night before and stick it in their fridge, and they can have it on their way to class in the morning. Or they can grab, sushi the night before and, like you said, keep it in your fridge. If there's one way that you really want to help your student, is even just investing in like a small lunch bag and an ice pack. There are some students that maybe it's not cool enough and maybe they won't bring it, but there are other students that absolutely might benefit from it. And it's just a simple solution that they just haven't thought of.
Yeah. And here's the big question. Do college students eat breakfast, or do they just sleep in and then run to class?
I have to say they typically will sleep in and run to class unless they are up. So if you ask a college student, they say, yes, I sometimes eat breakfast, but typically that means that they're up at 8, they're at class at 8:15, and breakfast is at like 10:30. So I always have to be a little tricky when I ask students, and I don't always call it breakfast. I have to say, when is the first time you eat during the day? Because that can be a little nuanced.
So all of these various factors that we've been talking about are concerns that students might have. I feel like there are ways that parents can help encourage their student if they bring them up. Can you talk a little bit about the ways parents can talk about these things with their student that kind of apply to, kind of universally?
Yes. And so as a new mom, I get it, right? Like your student calls you and maybe they're in tears or they're upset, they're stressed. You hear the distress and the concern in their voice. And of course, the first thing you want to do is just fix it, right? Like I totally get that. And so I think that these are really important conversations that can happen to really also just reassure them that this adjustment, that this discomfort is very normal, that there's going to be some growing pains, there's going to be some bumps at the beginning. I think it's really important to encourage them to try new things and, ask sort of some probing questions about the resources that they've used. This is such an important time for students to develop these self-advocacy skills. I hear parents all the time say, well, my student doesn't want to make a fuss, or they don't want to make a big deal. They don't want to bother someone. But dining services that's why they're here, right? I always say, like, they could go get a job sitting behind a desk or answering phones somewhere, but they truly love working with the students and they want to help. And unfortunately, when it comes to sort of food things, it's not tattooed across somebody's face, right? It's not like a broken arm where we can see the cast. So they don't know unless somebody speaks up. And so I think it's really important to have those conversations. If there's something that is amiss, or for some reason somebody can't or isn't comfortable having that face-to-face conversation, there also is an anonymous texting phone number that's available on the dining services website. It's also posted in the dining areas, and students can send that text, and it does go straight to the dining services director's phone. So that can be addressed right there. Other resources, ask them who they talked to. Were they able to find a manager? Did they check the menus online, right? Trying to get as specific as possible. And if that student really is like, no, this nothing's working, nothing's getting better, it's also really important to maybe ask some probing questions outside of the food, because very often some of the discomforts and the issues with food are really just a manifestation of some other problems. Ask them about their classes, ask what's going on with their roommate, ask about friends, right? Because a lot of times it may just be they don't like going to the dining hall because they're uncomfortable sitting alone, or, they don't like going because, they go to a meal with their roommate and their roommate has a friend that they don't like and they're not getting along, right? Or there's something, again, stressing them out. Lunch makes them sick every day because they're going straight from calculus to lunch, right? And then they just have an icky association. So I also think it's really important to ask the questions outside of food to see if there's like a different root of the problem that can also be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I hear from parents, they'll see their student maybe for the first time at family weekend. They'll say, my student lost a lot of weight. They just don't seem to be getting enough food. What's happening there? Like when kids come to college, what's changing that might be affecting them in that way?
Yeah, so the big thing really is change in environment.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's stepping outside that comfort zone. So when a student comes to me and they're having some of those exact issues, those symptoms, I'll actually walk back a little bit and say, tell me about, your environment at home before you came in. And a lot of times the environment was very predictable. Right? I went to school, then I went to practice and a meeting, and I came home and dinner was just sort of on the table. And then I went and did homework, right? And there was a routine there. And then all of a sudden in school, for the first time, they're in charge of their own schedule, right? There's no set lunchtime like there is in high school. There's no set dinner time. All of a sudden, there's more breakfast options, right? Typically, maybe they always had cold cereal, and now all of a sudden there's an omelet station and there's English muffins. And so sometimes those changes can just be very overwhelming. And so again, with that fight or flight, we sometimes have students that go crazy, right? They go on one end of the spectrum where they just want to eat everything. And then we have some students where sometimes the easiest piece of that is avoidance. Sometimes the energy needs are changing, right? So I always have to remind students as well that their bodies are still growing and changing. Their brains are still developing until they're 25. So that even if their schedule is maybe different than it was in high school, right? Maybe they were on the soccer team and they were exercising all the time and now they're not. so they feel like they don't need to eat as much, but their brain is still growing. They're still trying to process lots of information in class. Their sleep schedule is off, right? So they're staying up later, which is obviously going to burn a little bit more energy. They're walking up and down the hill here, which is going to burn more energy. So a lot of times that change can swing in the other direction, where students find themselves not nourishing enough. And that is, of course, something that I can certainly help guide students with too.
That's fabulous. I think you've actually shared with me that a student could even come to you and you'd be willing to like walk them through the dining hall if they're feeling overwhelmed. Can you talk a little bit about what you do there?
Absolutely. So oftentimes, especially if I do talk to parents, they say, well, my kid knows what to eat. They don't need a nutrition appointment because they know what healthy foods are. But my job goes beyond that. So sometimes it is helping students know what to eat, right? But oftentimes I will meet students where they need to be. If I need to meet them in a dining hall, I will do that. And I will walk them through the stations, and I will point out different things and different hacks. I'll introduce them to managers. I'll introduce them to dining directors and chefs. We are always, as a team, we're always happy to even hop on Zoom with parents and a student, right? If we all want to sit down and have more of like a round table discussion. I will meet students in like the library or more for coffee if they need just a more casual conversation. Sometimes I'll see students for 15 minutes and they just need a quick question answered, and that's totally fine. And sometimes I'll meet with students for an hour and a half if it's a bigger, deeper issue. So really whatever it is. I also work very closely with the Student Health Center. I can work with student home providers. I work with deans, whoever needs to sort of be brought into the conversation, because we know that eating is a complex issue, right? That we eat when things are good, we eat when things are bad, sometimes we don't eat when things are bad. And with something like college, there's just so many moving parts all at once that we want the student to be as well nourished as they possibly can to face all of these moving parts.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about a little bit earlier was that notion of independence, like the students are at a new level of independence when they're at school. And that seems like it's particularly important for folks to know about, what goes on when a student has either a medical condition or allergies. What would you want families to know about? Let's start with allergies. What are the factors that we would like family members to be aware of when their student comes to school? And some people have some very severe allergies to food items. So can you talk about that?
So probably rule number one is if your student does require an EpiPen or Benadryl or something like that, we always ask that they carry it with them. Our staff knows to sort of look for these things. So the dining staff all receives very extensive allergy training at the beginning of every semester, and then some refreshers throughout the semester. I also have a very advanced allergy training certificate. So I'm sort of the allergy expert on campus. Our chefs and all of our managers also receive extensive allergy training. So they're expecting questions. They are expecting special requests. So, again, that we hear it a lot of, well, my student doesn't want to speak up or they don't know who to go through. So you can always reach out to us and we will make those introductions. We want those students to know who we are when they see us in the dining hall. I always like to say communication's a two-way street. Our staff just wants to make it easy, right? So we certainly need to know about the allergies and medical conditions, but also, we want to make sure that we're creating a welcoming enough environment that we can deal with that as well. So meds and EpiPen should always be carried. If a student doesn't know how to use their EpiPen or they feel like they just need a refresher, there always is free training that is offered at the Student Health Center where they use oranges and dummy pens and those kinds of things. In Frank, we do have our Delicious Without station, and that station is free of the 9 major allergens. It was the 8, and then sesame was just recently added. So it's the 9 major allergens. If a student wants to eat somewhere else on campus, that's totally fine. I do sort of just put the caveat out there that the kitchen doesn't have, they're just not set up the same way for the same controls as they are in Frank. So anybody with really severe allergies, we typically push them more towards Frank, just because they'll be able to get a better variety of allergen-friendly food. Not to say that we can't do that in other places at all. And then, like I said, with those questions, all of our areas should have a designated allergen expert. So we have some people who have buttons, we have pictures of those folks, we have pictures of all the managers on the wall, we have signs everywhere that say, if you don't see something or if you have an allergy, don't assume, please ask. And then, of course, in our Dine on Campus app, if it is an item where the menu is available, students can click on that and they can see all the ingredients there, and that can be updated in real time. So if for some reason an ingredient needs to be substituted, then our cooks can go in and they can update that in real time. Again, depending on the severity, I would always verify. We have no secret ingredients. We have no secret recipes. We will bring containers out to a student who wants to read and evaluate that label themselves at any time. So we are very transparent in that.
So that allows the student to really take charge of what they're eating. They can just ask and they can see exactly what they're getting.
Yes, and we do have a policy that really only managers can answer those specific allergy questions. So I do like to say that too, because sometimes I do hear from students, well, I asked somebody, but they didn't know. And it's not that they didn't know, they are trained to sort of say, I don't know, let me just go verify with a manager. So sometimes if there is somebody right on the grill or right at the salad bar, right at the line, they are taught that they need to go verify that with somebody who is sort of in the back managing the food, cooking the food, creating the labels, that they can't just make that up on the spot. So it's not that we don't know, it's just, I don't know, I need to go check with my manager to verify.
And I think you said this, but just to put a finer point on it, dining services does want to know if there are any students with severe allergies. There is a form that they can fill out that goes on file, and then that's part of them helping support those students, correct?
Absolutely, yes. So there's a form on the Disabilities Office's website. So any student with an allergy, we do ask for them to go to also include the Office of Disability Services, because food allergies are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's considered just a modification for them. So we do ask that students fill that out, not for any sort of necessarily tracking purposes, but if we have 200 students on campus with severe peanut allergies, and we want to know that, right? Or if we have 1,000 students with a gluten allergy or something, we need to know that as well. So that just helps us guide some of our menus. We also have some allergen-friendly items that may not be out on the line available for everybody. And that is the other reason why we encourage students to speak up. Gluten-free pasta, for example. If anybody has ever made gluten-free pasta, it can be dry, it can be sticky, it can be clumpy. It's not something that we want to prepare and then again, just leave out under a heat lamp, because it's just not going to look good after a very short amount of time. So if a student wants gluten-free pasta, we have that available. They may just need to wait a few minutes, and a cook would be more than happy to boil that up for them. Or if there's chicken out on the line and it is next to eggs, and the student is worried about maybe there's some cross contact between the chicken and the egg, they can always ask for a separate one to be cooked. So we always have separate pans available where again the cooks know that they need to make a fresh piece of chicken in a pan away from everything else. So we do have a lot of protocols in place. Again, we just need to know that that's what somebody's looking for.
Great, thanks. So the other aspect that I think is important to talk about is, students may have other medical conditions related to eating, such as eating disorders. They may come with those conditions already, as and being in treatment or having been in treatment, or it may be something that emerges. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with students and any other departments on campus to support them in those?
Absolutely. So a good bulk of my caseload is either students with eating disorders who have come with the disordered eating, or maybe it's something that's developed over time or has resurfaced. And so depending on the severity, we also work very closely, or I should say I work very closely with the counseling center and student health services and athletics when needed. So we do have an eating issues treatment team on campus, which is just a multidisciplinary team where we sort of just share cases as needed. But also, I like to remind parents that even if your student doesn't seem like maybe they have a full-blown eating disorder, there are some disordered eating patterns that can come in college. And a lot of that manifests itself as a result of just needing control, right? That a lot of these students, especially as they're coming in now, maybe they were in high school during the pandemic, right? Or we had some students who maybe moved during the pandemic and then they went to college, and all of a sudden they haven't had to know how to make a new friend in many, many years. And so, sometimes things just feel a little chaotic and out of control. So that food is a way for them to sort of gain control. And so even if it's, like I said, not a full-blown eating disorder, sometimes there are some rules and some rituals that might pop up. I can't eat late at night. I can't eat any carbs, or I can't eat this, or I have to eat that. So for parents to really be on the lookout, and always encourage your students to come talk to me or somebody in the counseling center, or if it really seems like they're struggling with food agreeing with their system, again, making an appointment at the health center. And a lot of times they'll end up being referred to me, and we can sort of get to the bottom of what else might be going on. So we do have a lot of systems in place on campus. We have lots of different people talking to each other to make sure that everybody is taken care of and not falling between the cracks.
Allison, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. Before we go, just anything else that you would want families to know?
No, I think, the big thing is just reminding people that we want those questions. We appreciate that feedback. And so we welcome any suggestions, as specific as possible, is always really helpful. Any specific suggestions, and we're always happy to set up meetings with parents and students. And again, I'm going to push that dining advisory committee just one more time, because that's really just an easy way for students to get face-to-face with other students, members of SGA, sometimes the university, myself and other students, so that they can really kind of feel like their voices are heard to help guide what we offer on campus.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.